Hey everyone, Adam here. Today, I went deep into Reddit again, and let me tell you, marriage isn't just vows and fairy tales. It's wild, unpredictable, messy, and sometimes it takes a turn so sharp you forget you're reading real stories and not watching a thriller. Today, we're jumping into 5 marriage Reddit stories that took a wild turn, and every single one hits harder than the last. We start with a husband whose wife accidentally forgot her wedding ring at home. But the truth behind it didn't just raise suspicion, it shook the foundation of their entire marriage. Then we meet a guy whose wife called him too boring, so he stepped back and let her chase the exciting life she claimed that she wanted, until the whole thing exploded right in front of her. Another husband thought his wife was going to her usual yoga class harmless, routine until a stranger sent him a photo that ripped the blinds off the real story. And then there's the man who ignored a warning from his wife's best friend, only to find out the truth way too late. And honestly, it's brutal. And finally, the girls' trip that wasn't a girls' trip at all, because the airline ticket next to his wife's name belonged to one man and he definitely wasn't her husband. So grab your headphones, settle in, and get ready because these marriage stories aren't just shocking, they're downright jaw-dropping. My wife forgot her wedding ring at home and the reason why turned my entire marriage upside down. I swear I'm not the kind of husband who snoops or questions every tiny thing his wife does, or keeps mental notes about the way her voice changes when she's stressed or when she's lying, but that Thursday morning, something felt off before my feet even touched the floor, like the universe was trying to whisper something to me through the cracks in our bedroom blinds. A gentle warning I didn't yet understand as I dragged myself out of bed at 6 a.m., yawning, stretching, and expecting the same predictable routine I'd lived for years with Maya. Coffee brewing, the faint sound of her blow dryer, the smell of her citrus shampoo drifting down the hallway. All the tiny domestic pieces of a life I thought I understood. And yet that morning, the house felt different, still in a way that made the hairs on my arms rise, as if something had gone missing in the air itself. And it wasn't until I walked into the bathroom, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, that I saw it sitting there on the counter under the warm glow of the vanity lights. Maya's wedding ring, the one she hadn't taken off once in 8 years of marriage, the one she always joked felt like a second skin to her, the one she twisted absent-mindedly when she was nervous or thinking or even just watching TV. That ring, shining in a tiny perfect circle of betrayal I wasn't ready to understand yet, resting next to her favorite perfume bottle like it belonged there, like she'd placed it intentionally instead of forgotten it in a rush, and for a moment I genuinely froze, toothbrush in hand, staring at the gold band like it was a crime scene clue. Because Maya never forgot it. Not once, not during workouts, not during showers, not during arguments, not even when she burned her hand cooking last summer, and I remember whispering aloud, why would she take it off? As if the ring might whisper back. But of course it didn't. It just sat there, shining, heavy with meaning I couldn't decipher yet. And logically I tried, really tried, to give her the benefit of the doubt, telling myself maybe she'd just taken it off to moisturize her hands or to apply makeup, or maybe it slipped during her usual morning rush, but none of those excuses sat right with me. Not with the way she'd been acting lately. New perfume she never used around me. Not floral or soft like her usual, but something sharper, bolder, like she wanted to be noticed by someone who wasn't me. The sudden interest in form-fitting blouses I hadn't seen her wear since before we got married. The way she angled her phone away from me at night when messages popped up, always saying, it's just work, even though her eyes flickered with a tension she tried to mask. And those late-night strategy calls, the ones she took pacing around our kitchen, speaking in this strange, flirty professional tone I'd never heard before. A tone that made me ask once, jokingly, since when do marketing meetings sound like you're auditioning for a rom-com? And she just laughed it off, kissed my cheek, and said I was being dramatic. But now, standing there staring at the ring she loved more than half the jewelry she owned, the doubt that had been quietly brewing in the background of my brain for weeks suddenly surged to the front. And in that moment, I realized I knew the truth long before I allowed myself to acknowledge it. I knew something was wrong, something big, something that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I don't know what part of me snapped first, the rational part that still believed Maya was just stressed from work, or the emotional part that had already started mourning the marriage I thought I had. But that night, after she fell asleep with her back turned to me like I was a stranger occupying the same mattress, I found myself lying there, staring at the ceiling with the kind of crushing heaviness you feel when your body knows the truth before your mind accepts it. And after about an hour of listening to her soft breathing, my heart pounding loud enough to drown out everything else, I finally slipped out of bed, grabbed her laptop from her side of the desk, and sat in the hallway with only the dim light of the night lamp behind me. The house silent except for the low hum of the fridge and the storm of panic inside my chest, because I knew what I was about to do would change everything. And even though I hated the idea of invading her privacy, I hated the idea of being made a fool even more. So with shaky fingers, I opened the laptop and waited for the login screen to appear, praying she hadn't changed her password. And when I typed in the name of her childhood golden retriever, Bailey 12, and the screen unlocked instantly. My stomach hollowed out because the ease of it felt like a sign from the universe. She wasn't hiding her tracks because she didn't think I'd ever look. She didn't think I'd ever question her. She didn't think I'd ever suspect a thing. And that hurt more than anything, that she had that kind of confidence in my blind trust, but that feeling evaporated the moment I clicked her email and saw an entire universe I didn't recognize. A version of Maya I had never met. A woman who wasn't married, who wasn't committed, who wasn't wearing my ring, but instead using her maiden name, Maya Patel. Like, she'd stepped back in time to rewrite her identity, because email after email showed her RSVPing to conferences, dinners, hotel meetups using Miss Patel, introducing herself to clients as single, sending itinerary confirmations to coworkers where she wrote things like, "I'll meet you downstairs in the lobby at 7. Don't worry, I won't be wearing my ring tonight." And I swear my whole chest went numb reading that. Like someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart until the blood stopped moving. But the deeper I scrolled, the worse it got. Because buried in her sent folders were selfies I had never seen before. Ones taken in hotel bathrooms, dim conference hallways, inside Uber rides. Her makeup heavier, her hair styled in ways she never bothered with at home. Her face angled just slightly to show off a version of herself designed to be desirable. And in every one of those photos, there was something missing. The ring, the literal symbol of us, removed like an inconvenience. Like dead weight, she didn't want dragging down her ambitions, and it wasn't just the photos. The messages attached to them made my stomach twist because she wasn't just flirting casually or professionally. She was nurturing something intimate, something calculated, sending lines like, "You always know how to make these boring trips more exciting," or "Don't stand too close to me during the mixer tonight," or "They'll all know I have a favorite." And reading those felt like being stabbed from the inside, but nothing compared to the moment I found the thread with Dylan, the coworker I'd heard her mention once, briefly, casually, like he was irrelevant. Yet here he was, texting her like they were in a relationship, calling her babe, telling her he missed the feel of her hand in his at the last conference, asking if she'd booked the same hotel for the next trip so they could continue where we left off. And the worst part wasn't even his words. It was hers, because she responded like she'd been waiting for him, writing things like, "Of course I booked the same place, I like consistency," and "Relax, Ethan doesn't suspect a thing," and "After this promotion goes through, we can finally figure out the rest of our future." And when I read that last one, I swear the world tilted, my vision blurred, and for a second I genuinely thought I might throw up, because the betrayal wasn't just physical or emotional. It was strategic, planned, rehearsed, like she'd crafted an exit strategy where I wasn't even a variable anymore. Like I was just a placeholder until she secured her next rung on the corporate ladder. And the part that shattered me most was realizing Dylan didn't even know he was being used. He thought it was real, thought she cared, thought they were building something, and she played him just as cleanly as she played me. Using affection to get him to vouch for her, to get him to pull strings for her, to get him to speak her name in rooms she didn't belong in. And suddenly, everything made sense. The late night calls, the secrecy, the new clothes, the perfume, the ring she left behind like it meant nothing, because she wasn't living a double life by accident. She was doing it deliberately, surgically, removing me from her professional identity like I was a stain she needed to wash out to look shinier to the people who mattered more to her than her own husband. And sitting there in that dim hallway, scrolling through lies built on lies, I felt something inside me break, not loudly, not explosively, but quietly, like a rope snapping under too much weight. A final soft sound marking the end of everything I believed. And even though I wanted to scream, throw the laptop, wake her up, and demand answers, I didn't, because anger felt pointless compared to the hollow certainty settling inside me, the knowledge that I wasn't losing her. She'd already left me long before I opened her inbox. She'd just forgotten to tell me, and now all that was left was for me to gather every piece of evidence, every message, every photo, every disgusting breadcrumb she'd left behind, not for revenge, but for closure, for truth, for the quiet dignity of knowing exactly what was done to me before I walked away. And so I took a deep breath, wiped my face, and began screenshotting everything. Hand steady, heart silent, broken but resolute. Because if she could build a secret life behind my back, then I could build a case for my freedom in return. I didn't sleep the night before everything blew up, and maybe that's why I remember every second of the morning so clearly. The way the sunlight crept across the living room floor like it had no idea my marriage was in ashes. The way my hands shook while I brewed coffee I didn't even drink. The way the quiet of the house felt like the calm before a hurricane. And as I sat there at the dining table with my laptop open, staring at the folder of screenshots and messages that had become the obituary of my relationship, I knew exactly what I had to do, even if part of me hated the person I was about to become. But betrayal changes something in you. It shifts your moral lines. It makes you see justice in ways you never did before. So I took a deep breath, created a new anonymous email, attached everything, every message with Dylan, every hotel booking under her maiden name, every photo without the ring, every disgusting flirty exchange she'd labeled as networking, and sent it directly to the one department she'd always bragged about having a great reputation with human resources. And the moment I clicked send, a quiet coldness settled into my chest. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just a numb certainty that whatever happened next, things could never go back to the way they were. And I wish I could tell you I felt guilty, but honestly, all I felt was a painful kind of relief, like finally breathing after months underwater. Within 2 hours, the company exploded. I don't mean emails or phone calls. I mean a full-blown corporate wildfire, the kind that spreads faster than rumor and burns hotter than truth. And I knew something had happened because at 10:17 a.m., Maya called me from her office phone, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before as she said, "Ethan, something's wrong. I'm being called into HR for I don't even know what." And I answered with the calmness of someone who'd rehearsed every possible version of this moment, saying only, "I'm sure it'll be fine," even though we both knew it wouldn't. And when she hung up abruptly, I sat there in the quiet of our home, imagining her walking through those polished glass hallways, heels clicking, heart racing, unaware she was seconds away from the collapse of the life she built on lies. Later, I would hear from a trusted source, one of her coworkers who always liked me more than her, that the moment she stepped inside the HR conference room, she froze because sitting at the long table were not just 2 HR reps, but 3 senior managers, 1 compliance officer, and her department head, all staring at her with the kind of expression people use when they already know the truth and are waiting to see how you'll destroy yourself trying to deny it. And the interrogation started with simple questions. "Miss Patel, can you explain the nature of your relationship with Dylan?" And she apparently laughed at first, confused, insisting they must be mistaken. But confusion turned to panic when they projected screenshots onto the large monitor in the room. Her own words shown in crisp, undeniable clarity. Messages she thought she'd deleted, photos she thought were private, hotel confirmations she didn't know were being archived automatically. And the moment she saw the selfie she took in the Marriott hallway, the one without her ring, the one she captioned Room 419, she apparently choked on her own breath, and HR knew right then that the game was over. But the real explosion came when they called Dylan in. The guy didn't even hesitate. He threw her under the bus so fast she didn't even have time to crawl out of the way, telling HR she had seduced him, manipulated him, pressured him, that she made him believe she was separated from her husband, that she told him she needed him to vouch for her to get promoted, that everything had been her idea, her plan, her manipulation. And I'm not defending Dylan. He was scum. But he was also smart enough to know saving himself meant sacrificing her. And Maya, who'd built her entire corporate image on confidence and charisma and control, suddenly found herself sweating through her blouse, her mascara smudging, her voice cracking as she tried to explain that it wasn't like that it was just flirting, that everyone did it, that she didn't actually sleep with him, which HR didn't even need to verify to determine she'd violated half the ethics policies they drilled into employees at orientation. They suspended her on the spot. No laptop, no badge access, no meetings. They escorted her out of the building like she was radioactive, and all the while she stared at her phone, probably wondering why I wasn't answering her panicked messages. "Can you talk? Something's happening. I need you. Please answer." I didn't answer because I didn't need to hear her lies in real time when I already had them preserved in screenshots. She didn't come home until 5:30 p.m., and when she walked through the door, her eyes were swollen, her makeup smeared, her hair frizzy, her whole appearance unraveling the way her career had that afternoon. And the moment she saw me sitting on the couch, she froze like a deer on a highway because she saw something in my expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not heartbreak, not accusation, just emptiness. And emptiness is harder to face than rage because rage means someone still cares enough to feel something. "You knew," she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. And I didn't say yes, I didn't nod, I didn't confirm anything, I just looked at her, waiting to see who she'd become without her lies to hide behind, and it didn't take long for her to detonate. She started with denial, insisting, "It wasn't real, Ethan. You don't understand. It was just work. It was for us, for our future." Then she shifted to anger, shouting that I violated her privacy, that everyone flirts for business, that I should have supported her ambition, that if I weren't so insecure, she wouldn't have had to hide things. And hearing her say those things felt surreal, like I was watching an actor butcher the script of my life, because none of her excuses matched the cruelty of her actions. And when she screamed, "I did it for us," I finally spoke, my voice quiet but steady. "You planned to leave me." She froze, completely, because she knew exactly what message I was referencing, the one where she told Dylan that after her promotion, they could figure out the rest of their future. And the silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. She sank onto the floor, sobbing, shaking, begging, actually begging for me to forgive her, saying it meant nothing, saying she lost herself, saying she made a mistake, saying anything she could to claw back into a life she'd already destroyed. But all I felt was that same cold emptiness, that hollow ache of knowing the person you loved had used your loyalty as a safety net until she didn't need it anymore. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't call her names. I just watched her crumble on the hardwood floor, realizing she wasn't crying because she loved me. She was crying because she lost the life she was trying to juggle, and now both futures were gone. She begged me not to leave, repeating the words like a mantra, "Don't go, don't go, don't go." But she didn't understand that I had already left her long before she came home that day. Not physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, because there comes a moment when betrayal breaks you so cleanly that nothing the other person says can glue you back together. And as she pleaded, voice raw and desperate, I sat there in silence, already planning my exit, knowing with absolute clarity that this was the beginning of the end. The days after Maya's downfall felt strangely silent, like the world had hit a mute button on everything except my own thoughts, and it wasn't the dramatic chaos I expected. Not shouting, not slamming doors, not endless arguments. It was a dull, aching quiet, the kind that follows a tornado when everyone just steps outside and looks around at what's left. And for me, what was left was a marriage that felt like a burned out foundation, with nothing standing except the memory of what I thought it had been. Meanwhile, Maya was living inside a storm she created, spiraling deeper by the hour, losing not just her job, but her entire identity. Because the company didn't just fire her, they documented everything, made her sign papers acknowledging the violation of ethics, wiped her system clean, and escorted her out like she was toxic waste. And apparently word spread fast because her coworkers stopped responding to her. Her manager blocked her number, and Dylan, the man she thought would save her future, cut all contact the second the investigation report pinned him as cooperative and her as primary responsible party, leaving her with no career, no credibility, and no backup plan. And when she realized she had burned every branch of her carefully crafted double life, she turned all her desperation toward me. At first, she tried to manipulate me in that subtle way she'd always done. Soft apologies, gentle touches, talking about our wedding, the apartment we built together, the vacations we took, acting like nostalgia could glue a shattered foundation back into anything stable. But I had already seen the version of her she tried to hide. The woman who used her maiden name like a costume, who took off her ring like it was an accessory, who flirted with men to gain professional shortcuts, who promised futures to someone else while sleeping in my bed. And once you see a person without their mask, you never forget their real face. When the soft manipulation failed, she shifted into self-pity, saying she lost everything and couldn't handle the stress, that she didn't know who she was anymore, that she needed me to help her rebuild her life, acting like I owed her a recovery after she destroyed mine. And when pity didn't work, she turned angry, accusing me of ruining her career, screaming that if I hadn't snooped, this never would have happened, that she would have gotten her promotion, that we could have had a better life. But the thing that struck me most was that all her pain was centered around her consequences, not what she had done to me, and that realization hardened something inside me I didn't even know I still had. The strange thing was that while she spiraled, I started healing, not in some dramatic, new life overnight way, but slowly, like a bruised rib, learning to take full breaths again. I started going on long walks, talking to friends I hadn't seen in months because I've been so busy supporting Maya's ambitions. And for the first time in a long time, I heard myself think without her voice crowding my head. I sat in cafes with a notebook, writing down everything I'd ignored for years. Moments she belittled me, times she made me feel small, how she always acted embarrassed when I showed affection in public, how she treated commitment like a wardrobe choice that depended on whether or not someone more important was watching. And the more I reflected, the more I realized I hadn't just lost a wife. I had lost a delusion, and losing a delusion is painful but freeing. Meanwhile, Maya was unraveling faster than she could pretend to hold together. She stayed home all day refreshing her email like someone might magically offer her job back. She tried reaching out to coworkers who ghosted her. She left voicemails for Dylan that went straight to a disconnected message, and every night she cried in our bedroom, pacing back and forth while I sat in the guest room, listening to the muffled sounds of someone mourning the collapse of the life they built on deception, not the collapse of the marriage they betrayed. And the more she tried to pull me back emotionally, the further I drifted. Not because I wanted revenge, but because living in the same house felt like breathing secondhand smoke from a fire she refused to put out. One night, after another exhausting cycle of her breaking down, then blaming me, then apologizing, then exploding again, something inside me clicked into place. Not anger, not sorrow, just clarity. A clean, steady realization that I didn't have to keep drowning in her chaos, that I could step out of it, that I had the power to choose peace even if she never learned how. So the next morning, I got dressed, brewed my coffee, opened my laptop, and drafted the divorce papers with a sense of calm I didn't expect. And it wasn't a vengeful decision, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, it was simply choosing myself, maybe for the first time in years. When Maya saw the stack of documents on the table that evening, she froze like her brain couldn't process what her eyes were seeing, and then she picked them up with trembling fingers and whispered, "Ethan, No, please, no. And her voice cracked so hard that if this were months ago, I would have folded instantly. But now it just sounded like someone who didn't want to live with the consequences of her own choices. She started crying, hysterical, begging me to talk, to reconsider, to remember what we had. But the thing she didn't understand was that I did remember. I remembered everything, especially the fact that she had forgotten me long before I found the ring on the bathroom counter. When she realized begging wasn't enough, she threw out all the excuses she'd stored, saying, "It was one mistake. One. You're going to end our marriage over one stupid mistake?" And that's when I finally spoke the words that had been sitting on my chest since the moment I realized who she truly was. I looked her straight in the eyes and said almost softly, "You didn't forget the ring. You forgot me." She broke. Completely. Not in a dramatic movie way, but in the quiet, shattering way someone does when they realize the thing they took for granted has finally walked away. She slid down the wall, sobbing into her hands, saying she didn't mean to, that she loved me, that she could change, but apologies don't rebuild trust, promises don't erase betrayal, and tears don't fix a heart someone stepped on while wearing heels. I left the papers on the table and walked into the bedroom to pack a bag, not rushing, not panicked, just moving with the certainty of someone who had finally chosen freedom over chaos. And as I zipped the suitcase, the weight on my chest I'd been carrying for months lifted, not fully, but enough for me to breathe again. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't yell. I didn't throw accusations. I just walked out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the cool night air, feeling the strange calm of someone who had survived the worst part already. And life didn't suddenly get perfect. Healing wasn't instant, but it was real. 6 months passed. I moved into a smaller place near Lake Michigan, focused on work, therapy, cooking meals for myself, rediscovering what peace actually sounded like. And slowly, the bitterness evaporated, leaving behind something gentler. Understanding, growth, a quiet kind of hope. One bright morning, I sat at a lakeside cafe with a book in my hand and sunlight on my face, watching kids run along the water while the breeze carried the smell of roasted coffee and fresh pastries, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not at myself, not at the past. I wasn't wearing a wedding ring anymore, but I was wearing something better, a sense of freedom, wholeness, and the knowledge that I deserved a love that didn't disappear when opportunity called, a love that didn't change depending on the audience, a love that didn't remove its commitment the moment a door opened for something better. And as I took a sip of my coffee, watching the waves shimmer under the morning sun, I knew with absolute certainty that leaving Maya wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a life where I would never again mistake manipulation for affection or ambition for love. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt genuinely okay, even hopeful, because somewhere out there was someone who wouldn't treat loyalty like clothing, someone who wouldn't forget me when the world offered her a stage, someone who would wear her commitment proudly, not take it off when it was inconvenient, and I knew that when she came into my life, I'd be ready. The end. My wife said I was too boring, so I let her have the exciting life she wanted, until it all crashed down. I still remember the exact moment my marriage cracked, not with a scream, not with cheating evidence, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with 12 quiet words my wife Lena threw at me like they were nothing, words that lodged themselves under my ribs and stayed there like shrapnel. "I feel like I'm suffocating in this predictable life of yours," she said, not even looking at me, not even angry, just annoyed, like I was the reason her world felt too still, too steady, too safe, and I stood there in our kitchen in Austin, frozen with a spatula in my hand because I had been making her favorite lemon butter chicken after a long day of work, thinking a warm meal would ease the tension that had been growing between us for months, maybe even a year, maybe longer if I was being honest with myself. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, like a rug being pulled out from under my feet, but quietly, silently, without force. And the worst part was that this wasn't the woman I married. When I met Lena 8 years earlier, back when I was 24 and she was 22, she used to brag to her friends about how stable I was, how she'd finally found a guy who didn't play games, who didn't disappear for days, who didn't cheat or flirt or break promises, a guy who kept his word and showed up on time, who worked hard and wanted a calm, predictable life with her. She loved that about me, clung to it like it was a lifeline after growing up with a chaotic father and unreliable boyfriend, and she used to grab my arm when we walked downtown and tell me she'd never felt safer with anyone in her life. Back then, she liked our slow mornings, our grocery runs, our late-night Netflix binges, our quiet weekends grilling on the patio. She liked how I planned days ahead and saved money and knew what I wanted. But somewhere around year 4 of our marriage, the tone started changing in ways I didn't notice until it was too late. Small comments at first. "You always do things the same way," or "Don't you ever want to be spontaneous?" or "Why don't we ever do anything fun?" Said jokingly, with a laugh, with a nudge, the kind of comments you brush off because they seem harmless. But the harmless things accumulate until they aren't harmless anymore, until they turn into a pattern, until you wake up one day and realize Your wife has become restless in her own home, pacing like a caged animal who wants out but doesn't want to admit it. It started when she joined the art studio across town, this trendy warehouse turned creative space filled with 20-something free spirits who called themselves artists even though half of them were unemployed and living off their parents' credit cards. And she started going there more and more, staying later, talking about the energy and the vibe of the place, about how everyone there was alive, how they didn't live on routines, how they just felt the moment. Words that sounded like cliches but apparently lit something inside her, something I didn't recognize. Suddenly, she was buying new outfits. Shorter, tighter, more revealing, nothing like the simple sundresses she loved before. And she'd say things like, "It's just what everyone wears at the studio," and I'd nod, even though a knot would form in my stomach every time she left the house looking like someone I didn't know. She'd come home smelling different too, not just perfume, but cologne. Strong, masculine, expensive cologne. And when I'd ask about it, she'd wave her hand like I was being dramatic. "Oh my God, Ethan, it's a studio. People hug, relax." And I wanted to believe her, I really did. Because believing her meant believing our marriage wasn't crumbling. Believing I wasn't losing her to something I couldn't compete with, something I didn't even understand. I started trying harder, planning date nights, surprising her with weekend getaways, cooking new recipes, buying her small gifts, thinking that if I just reminded her of the version of us from the early days, she'd soften, she'd come back, she'd appreciate what we had. But every attempt was met with the same flat response. "This is nice, but," followed by a shrug or a sigh or a distracted glance at her phone. Or the worst, "You're trying too hard." And I guess she was right. I was trying too hard because I could feel her slipping away from me. And the more she pulled back, the more desperately I tried to hold on. Until eventually it felt like I was the only one rowing the boat. And she was just watching from the shore, criticizing my technique. She started going out with her fun friend group. These people I had never met, never heard of, people she wouldn't fully explain. And the nights got later, the stories got vaguer, the makeup got heavier, and the excuses got thinner. We lost track of time. My phone died. It was a girls only thing. "Don't wait up for me. Next time." And every time I pushed just a little, she'd push back harder, accusing me of being controlling, insecure, paranoid, boring. That word she used like a knife. Boring. Like it was the most unforgivable sin a man could commit. And then came the night everything inside me broke. She came home at 2:17 a.m. Drunk, but not sloppy. Just loose and glowing and wearing a smile she never gave me anymore. And when she walked past me, when I asked who she'd been with, she rolled her eyes and said, "Stop being boring for once in your life, Ethan," before disappearing into the bathroom to shower. And when she came out, she smelled like a different scent entirely. One that didn't belong in our house. One that didn't come from any store I knew she shopped at. And that was the night I cried into the kitchen sink at 3 a.m. like a man who didn't know who he was anymore. Because it hit me then. She didn't see me as enough. She didn't see our life as enough. She didn't even see me as the person she'd chosen. I was just a placeholder for stability until she decided she wanted something wilder. But I didn't confront her. Not that night, not the next morning, not even the day after. Because something told me that if I forced a conversation, she'd twist it, spin it, deny it, make me doubt myself, and I didn't want to doubt myself anymore. I wanted clarity. I wanted truth, even if that truth hurt. And the truth came not through snooping or digging or prying, but by pure accident a week later, when I stopped by her studio to drop off the lunch she forgot. Something I had done 100 times before. And when I walked in, I heard her laugh from behind one of the giant canvases. A laugh I hadn't heard in months, bright and eager and young. And then I heard a man's voice respond, low and smooth and intimate in a way a stranger's voice should never be with my wife. And when I rounded the corner, I saw him. Tall, tattooed, messy hair, a bartender from some downtown rooftop bar I'd never been to. His hand on the small of her back as she leaned into him like they were sharing oxygen. And they didn't notice me right away. Not until he brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and whispered something that made her bite her lip and blush. And that was the moment Lena finally turned and saw me standing there with her loyal lunch bag in my hand like a prop from a bad movie, and her face drained of color, the way someone looks when the curtain is yanked back and the audience sees everything they weren't supposed to. And that man, Jace, I would later learn his name was, just smirked at me like he already knew he'd won something I didn't even realize I was competing for. And in that frozen, breathless moment, everything clicked into place. The cologne, the lies, the secrecy, the late nights, the clothes, the attitude, the restlessness. She hadn't been searching for herself. She'd been searching for him, or someone like him, someone who made her feel chaotic and alive and reckless in a way I never wanted to be. And the worst part wasn't that she cheated. It was that she looked happier with him than she had with me in a long time. And that truth, that tiny flicker of joy in her eyes for another man, changed something in me forever. I didn't confront Lena after seeing her with Jace at the studio. Instead, something inside me went eerily calm, like a switch flip. Like the part of me that had been panicking, pleading, bargaining, suddenly went quiet and observant. and I realized I'd spent months trying to save a marriage only I was fighting for while she sprinted toward the fantasy of a life she thought she deserved. So I decided, quietly, without drama, to let her have that life, to stop being the safety net she resented and instead step back, watch, learn, prepare, because if she wanted excitement, chaos, unpredictability, then she could dive into it headfirst without me holding the ladder. After that day at the studio, her transformation accelerated like someone hit fast forward on a movie I didn't want to watch but couldn't look away from, and every night she came home later, wearing even shorter dresses, heavier eyeliner, glitter on her collarbones, smelling like a mix of club smoke and men's cologne, and she'd walk in with this dazed, dreamy expression like she'd been transported somewhere thrilling and intoxicating that made our home feel dull in comparison. And she'd say things like, "You don't mind, right?" Or "It was just one drink," or "Everyone goes out on weeknights." And I'd nod. Not because I believed her, but because nodding was easier than arguing with someone who had already mentally checked out of our marriage. Jace was everywhere in her conversations now, not by name, but through influence. He'd tell her to live a little, to stop letting Ethan control your life, to embrace the moment. These phrases she repeated like mantras as if they were profound instead of manipulative garbage, and I could see the subtle signs of someone grooming her into codependency. The way she needed his approval, the way she dressed according to his comments, the way she laughed too loudly when he texted her, the way she missed work because she stayed out too late with him, the way she spent money on overpriced outfits and bar taps because he told her she looked hottest when she didn't care about price tags. And I watched it all with a strange sense of detachment, like I was studying a slow-motion car crash, knowing exactly how it would end, but letting it unfold on its own. At the same time, with her drifting further from our life, I started building one without her. Not out of revenge, not even consciously, but because I needed something to hold on to that wasn't her spiraling madness. So I joined a gym for the first time in my adult life. And the trainer told me I moved like a man who carried stress, like bricks in his shoulders. And every time I walked out drenched in sweat, I felt a little lighter, a little stronger, a little less like a ghost haunting my own home. I reached out to old friends I drifted from because Lena always said they were too basic or not her vibe, and they welcomed me back with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. We grabbed beers, played basketball, hiked, laughed, and for the first time in forever, I felt like a person again instead of a disappointment in Lena's eyes. I even found a therapist because I needed someone neutral to help me untangle the mess in my chest, and she told me something that stuck. You're grieving the version of your wife that no longer exists. And that sentence hit me like a brick because it was true. I wasn't grieving the marriage we had now. I was grieving the woman who used to curl up against me on Sunday mornings and whisper that she felt lucky to have me. Meanwhile, the more I focused on myself, the more confused Lena became, because she expected the old Ethan, the one who begged for scraps of her attention, to still be there. So when I didn't question her late nights, didn't text asking where she was, didn't argue when she canceled plans, didn't chase after her, she grew irritated and uneasy, saying things like, "You don't even care anymore," and "You're acting weird," and "Why are you so distant?" And I wanted to laugh at the irony because she was the one sprinting away from me, yet somehow my lack of panic offended her, like she wanted the comfort of knowing I'd always be there waiting while she lived a double life. But I just nodded and said, "I'm tired," or "I'm focusing on other things," which only confused her more. I started noticing how Jace's influence wasn't the dream she thought it was. He was possessive, subtly critical, the kind of guy who complimented her looks but insulted her stability, who loved the version of her that rebelled but dismissed the parts of her that were grounded. And when she came home one night with smeared mascara, slurred words, and a bruise on her wrist disguised under bracelets, something inside me clenched, but I forced myself to stay neutral because she chose that world. She chose him, and if I intervened, she'd defend him and blame me. So I simply asked if she was okay, and she snapped, "It's nothing," before locking herself in the bathroom for an hour. As the weeks rolled on, the lies became more ridiculous. She'd say she was at the studio when I knew the studio closed hours earlier. She'd say her phone died even though she charged it religiously. She'd claim she was with friends whose names she couldn't remember. And every time I nodded and said, "Okay," she looked more unsettled, like my calmness was somehow scarier than anger. But I had learned by then that the person who blows up loses control, and the person who stays quiet gains it. During all this, I also quietly began preparing, meeting with a lawyer, gathering financial documents, separating my accounts, protecting my assets, not because I wanted revenge, but because I refused to let her recklessness drag me down with her. She had no idea I was planning our escape routes while she was throwing herself deeper into the nightlife world, like a teenager who just discovered freedom, completely unaware that freedom without boundaries is just self-destruction wrapped in glitter. She started missing work entirely, blaming migraines or traffic or mental health days, and then she began spending our joint savings on outfits, drinks, Ubers, tattoos, and whatever else Jace convinced her looked wild and sexy. And the Lena I once knew, the compassionate artist who painted with soft colors and cried during Pixar movies, was gone, replaced by someone who looked at me like I was a relic from a past life she'd outgrown. I watched all of this, not with heartbreak anymore, but with a strange acceptance. Because somewhere along the way, I learned the truth most people never want to admit. You can't save someone who's running toward their own fire, and sometimes the only thing you can do is step out of the way and let them burn. And so I did. I let her stay out, let her lie, let her chase excitement until it consumed her. Because while she thought I was fading into the background, becoming irrelevant, becoming the boring husband she could ignore, she didn't realize I was quietly freeing myself. Emotionally, mentally, financially. And every day she drifted further into the illusion Jay sold her. I stepped further out of the marriage she had already abandoned, and by the time she finally noticed I wasn't following her into the chaos, it was far too late for her to turn back, because I was no longer the man fighting to keep her. I was the man watching the rope between us wear thin, knowing exactly how and when it would snap. The crash didn't happen in one dramatic explosion. It happened slowly, painfully, piece by piece, like the universe peeling away every illusion Lana had wrapped herself in, until all that was left was the raw truth she kept running from. And it started with Jace, the man she threw our marriage away for, the man who made her feel young and wild and alive, the man she thought was a spark missing from her life. Because one night, weeks into her fantasy world, she walked into the rooftop bar where he worked, dressed in the tight black dress he told her he loved, all confidence and glitter and rebellion, only to freeze when she saw him at the far end of the bar kissing another girl. Not just flirting, not just being friendly, but full-on making out with a brunette in a sparkly silver top, his hands gripping her waist, his mouth on her neck, whispering the same words he once used on Lena, and the look on Lena's face, according to the bartender who later told me, was pure freefall, like her stomach dropped straight through the floor. When she confronted him, Jace didn't even pretend to be sorry. He laughed, shrugged, told her she was too clingy, that he never promised anything, that she was fun but not girlfriend material, and then, to twist the knife, he said she should chill out and stop acting like some boring housewife trying to cosplay as a party girl. And that line sliced into her, because that's exactly what she'd been trying to escape. The identity she had weaponized against me while chasing him. And when she demanded the money she'd lent him, the $600 she'd pulled from our joint account to help him with rent, he smirked and said, "What money?" before walking away with the brunette, leaving Lena standing there, shaking, humiliated, and suddenly very sober. She stormed outside, furious, heartbroken, mascara streaking down her face, digging through her purse for her keys. And that was when she realized money was missing, too. Jace had stolen cash from her wallet earlier in the night, when she'd left her bag at a table, and the realization hit her like a punch because the man she risked everything for had used her, drained her, discarded her like a toy he got bored of, and she had no one to blame but herself. Still reeling, she tried calling her new friend group, the people she thought understood her, the ones who hyped her up, told her she deserved better than her boring husband, the ones she spent hundreds on in drinks and Uber rides and late night food, but not a single one picked up, not even on the third or fourth call. And when she texted them, the messages delivered but were never read, because of course they weren't friends. They were leeches orbiting whoever funded the night, and now that Lena wasn't useful, they didn't care if she was stranded, crying, or scared. She tried driving home but couldn't find her car, panic rising as she circled the block until she realized it had been towed because she had parked illegally while drunk. And suddenly everything hit at once. The betrayal, the emptiness, the loneliness, the embarrassment, the consequences of every reckless choice she made while chasing a dream she never understood. Meanwhile, at work, the boss who had already given her multiple warnings finally hit his limit. After she arrived 3 hours late, with no explanation, he told her he couldn't keep her on the schedule, that reliability mattered, that he didn't recognize the employee she was becoming, and she tried to fight it, begged, cried. But he simply handed her the termination form and said, "I hope you figure yourself out." And losing her job, the one stable thing she still had, cracked her open completely. Because now, she wasn't just heartbroken and alone. She was unemployed, broke, and drowning in shame. That night, trapped outside the club with no car, no friends, and no money left on the card she'd recklessly drained, she finally called me. Not with anger or manipulation or the sharp edge she'd used for months, but with a small broken voice I barely recognized, whispering, "Ethan, I need help. Please." And I could hear everything in that one plea. The regret, the fear, the humiliation, the collapse of the world she tried so hard to build without me. But I didn't rush out the door like the old Ethan would have. I didn't jump to rescue her, didn't play the savior she had mocked for being predictable and dependable, because she hadn't wanted the stable husband. She wanted the thrill, the chaos, the fun world she thought she deserved. And now she was sitting in the middle of it with no one left to hold on to. I told her calmly that I was busy, that I could call her an Uber but couldn't come get her, and there was a long silence on the line, the kind that feels like someone's heart folding in on itself, followed by a quiet, "Okay," before she hung up. And even though part of me ached hearing her like that, another part, the part that had cried alone at 3 a.m., while she danced with another man, knew she was finally facing the consequences she had been running from. She arrived home an hour later, stepping through the door like a ghost. Makeup smeared, dress torn, hair knotted, eyes swollen, and she didn't say a word as she dropped onto the couch, curling into herself like she was trying to disappear. And for the first time in months, she wasn't angry, defensive, superior, or distant. She was just broken, small, and shockingly human, stripped bare of every illusion she'd clung to. And seeing her like that collapse under the weight of her own choices, I felt something shift. Not pity, not triumph, just a strange stillness, because this was the moment karma caught up. Not with vengeance or cruelty, but with inevitability. She tried to speak a few times, her lips trembling, but no words came out. Only shaky breaths and quiet sobs, and she didn't look at me. Couldn't look at me, because she knew, finally, without excuses or denial, exactly what she had done. Not just to me, but to herself. And the silence that filled the room wasn't the cold, distant silence of our previous months, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a woman who had reached the end of the road she had chosen, only to find it led nowhere. And that was the night I realized something important. She wasn't coming home because she loved me or wanted to rebuild. She was coming home because everything she'd gambled her life on had fallen apart, and she had nowhere else left to go. I woke up the morning after Lena came home, shattered, mascara streaked, shoes in her hands, and a silence hanging on her like the last bit of dignity she had left. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to fix anything. I didn't feel the panic that used to rise in my chest whenever she cried or looked lost. And I didn't feel responsible for holding together a marriage that had already collapsed long before I admitted it to myself. So when she emerged from the bedroom with puffy eyes and trembling hands, whispering, "Ethan, can we talk?" I just nodded and sat down at the table like I was meeting an acquaintance, not my wife of 6 years, and she sat across from me like someone trying to gather all the pieces of a life she had thrown into a storm with both hands. She stared at me for a long moment before whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And her voice cracked like she was feeling the weight of every choice she made when she traded stability for chaos. When she traded a man who loved her for a man who only saw her as entertainment. And she kept rambling about how she messed up and never meant for things to go this far and just wanted to feel something again. But the truth was simple. She had wanted excitement. And excitement had swallowed her whole and spit her out on my doorstep when it was done. And she said she missed me. Missed us, missed the version of herself she only seemed to like when she was standing next to me, and I listened quietly because I'd already grieved the woman she used to be and the marriage we once had, and all that was left inside me now was a calm resignation, a clarity that had taken months of hurt to reach. She said she wanted to try again. She wanted to rebuild. She wanted another chance, and for the first time she looked terrified, genuinely terrified. Not that I was angry, but that I didn't feel anything at all, and I told her gently, "Lena, I didn't leave you. You left me long before any of this happened." And the way her face crumbled almost made me look away, but I stayed present because the truth needed air. She whispered that she thought I'd always be there, always forgive her, always let her come back because I was the stable one. And I told her stability wasn't the same as weakness, and that love didn't mean being a doormat she could wipe her feet on every time she ran off chasing a new high. And she started crying harder, whispering I didn't know what I had. And I believed her because she really didn't. Not until the world she picked over me collapsed on her like a house of cards. I explained that her restlessness wasn't about me being boring or predictable or safe. It was about her being insecure, easily influenced, desperate for validation from people who only cared about using her. And when I told her that Jace was never competition, that he was just a lesson she refused to learn until it burned, she put her head in her hands like the truth hurt worse than anything he'd ever done. She asked if there was someone else in my life now, someone who replaced her, and I said no. Not because I was waiting for her, but because I'd been busy rebuilding myself piece by piece, quietly becoming someone stronger, someone steady in a way that had nothing to do with being boring and everything to do with being whole. I told her about therapy, about new friends I'd made, new routines, new confidence, and new job opportunities I'd been pursuing while she was chasing adrenaline in dark clubs that only cared about who could buy the next round. I told her how peaceful it felt to sleep without waiting for the sound of her key in the lock at 3 a.m., how freeing it felt to not check her location every night, how good it felt to finally choose myself after years of trying to convince her I was enough. And she kept saying she could fix things, she could change, she could be better, but she didn't understand that I wasn't asking her to become better for me, and I wasn't signing up to be the man she rediscovered only when the world chewed her up. She lost me the moment she made me feel small, boring, unworthy, the moment she looked at me and said she was suffocating in the life we built together while running into the arms of a man who couldn't even remember her birthday. She begged me not to give up on us, and I told her calmly that I wasn't giving up. I was just accepting reality, something she had refused to do until the consequences dragged her there, kicking and screaming. I explained that love without trust isn't love, It's just fear wrapped in nostalgia, and she finally looked at me with the realization that everything she once mocked, my routines, my quietness, my predictability, had actually been the only place she'd ever been loved without conditions. She apologized again and again, but apologies don't rebuild foundations that have already cracked beyond repair. And when she asked, "Is there any hope for us?" I told her the truth gently but firmly. There's hope for you to become better. There's hope for me to live a healthier life. But there isn't hope for our marriage, not anymore. And she broke down completely, sinking into her chair like she finally understood that losing a good partner is its own kind of grief, one that hits harder when you realize it was preventable. I stood up, not out of anger, but closure, and I told her I was filing for divorce, not to punish her, not out of spite, but because staying would mean abandoning myself again, and I refused to go back to a version of me that begged for crumbs of affection from someone who treated my love like background noise. She nodded through tears because she knew I was right, knew she had pushed too far and too long, knew that I had become the man she needed only after she destroyed the version of me she took for granted. I walked to the door, paused, and told her one last thing before leaving the house that had become a graveyard for our marriage. You wanted excitement, and you got it, but excitement doesn't love you back. And as I stepped outside into the bright morning air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on another person's choices, but the kind that comes from finally choosing myself. The end. Thought my wife was going to yoga class until a stranger sent me a photo that changed everything. I never thought my life in suburban Colorado would unravel because of something as harmless sounding as a yoga class. But looking back now, I can see the cracks forming long before everything exploded. Cracks I kept painting over with trust and routine because that's what you do when you believe you're in a stable marriage. You don't assume the worst, you assume your partner is tired, stressed, or just overwhelmed. And for 8 years, from the early days of meeting Emily at a friend's backyard barbecue, to building a quiet, comfortable married life with weekend hikes in the Rockies, lazy Sunday brunches in downtown Boulder, and our shared little rituals like grocery runs and arguing over which show to start next, everything seemed steady, predictable, even safe. So when Emily told me one night over dinner that she'd been feeling off mentally, stressed from work, anxious in ways she couldn't explain, and wanted to join an evening yoga class twice a week to help her center herself, I didn't question her. I supported her the way a husband is supposed to, telling her I thought it was a great idea and even offering to go with her, imagining it could be a fun way for us to bond while also helping her relax. But she shot the idea down so quickly it stunned me, snapping that she needed private time, that the whole point of the class was for her to be alone and decompress without me hovering. And I remember thinking the reaction was unusually sharp, but I shrugged it off because people under stress react in strange ways, and I didn't want to make her feel guilty for wanting personal space. Except after that night, things began shifting in ways I couldn't quite ignore. Her phone practically glued to her hand at all hours, even in the house, as if she was waiting for messages she didn't want me to see, new workout clothes, expensive ones, appearing suddenly, clothes she never wore around me before, her leaving the house earlier than her yoga class supposedly started and returning home later and later each time, always claiming class ran long or she stayed to talk with someone about meditation techniques. And the strangest part, the thing that really made something feel wrong in my gut, was how she would head straight to the shower the moment she walked through the door. Like she couldn't stand being in the house for even 1 minute before washing something off her. And yes, the rational part of me tried to believe she was just sweaty, exhausted, trying to unwind, but the irrational part, the one we all keep buried under loyalty, kept whispering that this wasn't normal, especially when she started pulling away emotionally, skipping the little things we used to enjoy together. Our Netflix nights became rarer. She avoided intimacy with vague excuses, and her phone suddenly had a passcode I didn't know, left face down every time she put it on the table. We stopped talking the way we used to, with her giving distant half answers or none at all. And I kept forcing myself to trust her because the alternative felt too painful to consider. And that's what makes betrayal so devastating. The way you keep choosing trust until the truth hits you like a freight train, which happened to me on a random Tuesday evening that started out no different from any other. I'd finished work early, made myself a sandwich, and was scrolling on my laptop when my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. And at first I thought it was spam or some telemarketer, except when I opened it, there was no text, no greeting, just a single photo that made my entire body go cold because there, in full clarity, was Emily in the parking lot of a strip mall yoga studio, kissing a man I had never seen before, their bodies pressed close, her hand on his chest in a way that wasn't friendly or accidental, but intimate, familiar, practiced, and I just froze staring at the image like maybe if I blinked enough times it would change into something else, something innocent, until another message popped up. My name is Claire. That man is my husband. We need to talk. And that was the moment my world tilted so violently that everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my wife, my life, shattered because Claire wasn't sending me this out of anger or spite. The tone of her message was heartbreakingly calm, controlled in a way that made it clear she wasn't surprised. She was confirming something she already knew. And within minutes, she told me she had been collecting evidence on her husband for weeks, that she suspected he was having an affair but only recently connected the dots to Emily because of suspicious schedule overlaps and little inconsistencies she had noticed. And now that she had solid proof, she thought I deserved to know too. Everything she said made sense in a horrible, devastating way, especially when she explained how her husband, Daniel, had been acting strangely. Sudden gym obsession, new clothes, late night outings, excuses that didn't line up. And it was like listening to my own story from the other side of a cracked mirror. A parallel unraveling happening in someone else's house at the same time as mine. Both of us living with people who had mastered the art of lying to the faces of the people who trusted them most. I remember sitting there in my living room, the room Emily and I had decorated together. The room where we'd watch movies, celebrated holidays, laughed, argued, made up, planned our future, and now I was staring at a picture that changed everything inside those walls. And I felt my heart slam against my ribs as I typed back, asking her if we could meet in person, because I needed to understand how long this had been going on, how deep it went, and if there was any tiniest chance that what I was seeing wasn't what it looked like, though deep down I already knew it was real. Claire responded almost immediately and said she could meet me the next day at a small cafe 20 minutes from my house. And I agreed before I even fully processed it, because in that moment I wasn't thinking about strategic timing or emotional preparedness. I was thinking about how the woman I loved, the woman I built a life with, was out there somewhere kissing another man while I sat in the house she claimed to miss whenever she traveled for work. I didn't sleep that night, just lay awake replaying every small moment from the last few months, searching for signs I'd missed. Things she'd said that suddenly made sense in hindsight, like the time she claimed her yoga class had a special 2-hour meditation workshop and came home smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine, or when she said she was too tired after yoga to talk, but spent an hour texting someone in the bathroom, and the silent guilt in her eyes when I asked if everything was okay. Guilt I misinterpreted as stress, not betrayal. By the time morning came, my chest felt hollow, like something essential had been scooped out of me. I went to work, though I barely remember what I did. And after pretending to function all day, I drove to meet Claire, feeling like I was walking toward a truth that would permanently change my life. When I entered the cafe, she was already there, a woman in her mid-30s with a calm expression that barely hid the heartbreak beneath it. And she greeted me with a soft, sad smile, like she knew exactly what I was going through, because she was living it too. She didn't waste time. She pulled out a folder from her bag and placed it on the table between us. And inside were not just photos, but screenshots, timestamp call logs, location pings, and messages that made my stomach knot up, all outlining a pattern of meetings between our spouses that went far beyond yoga class parking lot kisses. And as she walked me through the timeline she had pieced together, I felt something inside me collapse because it was too precise, too consistent, too deliberate to mistake for anything other than a full-blown affair. And even though anger clashed with heartbreak inside me, all I could think was, how long has she been lying? How long have I been living with a version of Emily that wasn't real? And why was I still hoping this was somehow a misunderstanding? But Claire's evidence was undeniable. Dates, hours, screenshots of messages hidden under a disguised contact name, and suddenly the puzzle pieces of my last 2 months snapped into place in the ugliest way imaginable. When Claire finally finished explaining, she looked at me and said something that hit me harder than anything else. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but you deserve to know." And the painful truth was, yes, I did deserve to know, even if hearing it felt like losing the foundation of my life in one blow. We talked for almost 2 hours, comparing what we knew, realizing how expertly they coordinated their alibis, how they used yoga as the perfect cover, how they even overlapped schedules so cleanly that any normal spouse would believe them without question. And by the time we parted ways, I felt drained, numb, but also strangely clear-minded, because denial wasn't an option anymore. I drove home feeling like I was floating outside my own life, and as I parked, the house looked different, colder, like it belonged to a stranger. Emily wasn't home yet, probably at another yoga class, maybe even with him again, and I sat in the living room staring at nothing until the door finally opened and she walked inside, smiling faintly like everything was normal, and I felt my throat tighten with a mix of heartbreak and fury. But I didn't say anything, not yet, because Claire and I agreed we needed to gather more before confronting them, and I didn't want to explode without a plan. So I watched her move around the house, listened to her manufactured stories about class running late, and I kept quiet, numb and hurting, knowing my marriage wasn't just breaking. It had already broken long before I saw that picture, and I was only now waking up to the truth. That night, lying beside her, listening to her breathing while my mind echoed with Claire's words and the image of Emily kissing a man I didn't know, I realized I was about to enter a painful, unavoidable chapter of my life, one where everything I uncovered would only hurt more. But I had to know the full truth. even if it destroyed me. So when I texted Claire before bed, confirming we would keep investigating together, it wasn't out of revenge. It was because I needed to understand the depth of a betrayal I never imagined could happen in my own home, with my own wife. And as I closed my eyes, knowing tomorrow would bring a new cascade of revelations, I felt the cold, bitter reality settle in. I was about to learn things I would never be able to unlearn. The next morning, after meeting Claire, I woke up feeling like someone had stuffed my chest with concrete, like every breath scraped against a reality I didn't want but couldn't escape. And as I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Emily get ready for work, like she hadn't kissed another man in a parking lot 2 nights ago, I felt this surreal disconnect. Almost like I was floating outside my own body, watching a stranger pretend everything was fine. And maybe that was the moment I understood the emotional whiplash people talk about when they describe betrayal trauma, because I kept catching myself staring at her face, her hands, the way she tied her hair into that messy bun, wondering how many times she looked exactly like this while texting him. But I played along, spoke softly, acted normal, because Claire and I agreed that jumping too soon would give them time to hide evidence or twist narratives, and I wasn't going to be blindsided in court or in life, not after everything she had done. And the strange thing was that pretending got easier after a few hours, almost like my mind split into 2 versions of me, one that was crumbling inside and another that learned how to smile on command, nod when necessary, and act like the husband Emily still thought she was fooling. Later that afternoon, I met Claire again in the cafe, and this time she came prepared with an even thicker folder, one filled with printed screenshots, phone logs she'd pulled from her husband's cloud, location data she'd quietly tracked using a shared phone plan, and receipts for hotel stays he claimed were work training weekends. And when she slid the folder across the table toward me, I felt my stomach twist because every timestamp lined up perfectly with nights Emily claimed she was at yoga, helping a friend, stuck at work, or too exhausted to come home early. Seeing it all laid out like that, cold, clinical, timestamp betrayal, it shattered any lingering hope I might have had that this was some awful misunderstanding. Because Emily wasn't just cheating. She was orchestrating lies with surgical precision, crafting alibis, adjusting her tone to avoid suspicion, and cycling through excuses like she had rehearsed them for weeks. As we flipped through pages, connecting the dots like 2 detectives forced into a partnership by mutual devastation, Claire told me about the hell she had been living through, her voice steady but her eyes showing the exhaustion of someone who'd cried every tear she had. How Daniel suddenly became obsessed with the gym after years of refusing to work out. How he bought new cologne she didn't recognize. How he started taking late night runs despite never being a runner. How he locked his phone after a decade of open access. How he smiled less at home and more at his screen. And the parallels between her story and mine felt almost cruel, like the 2 of them had mirrored their deceit in perfect synchronization. We kept comparing our notes in a small notebook I brought, Emily's schedule, her arrival times, her excuses, her strange moods, and with every match, every alignment, every shared detail, the truth hit harder. The yoga class didn't exist. The stress wasn't real. The distance wasn't accidental. It was all deliberate, intentional, calculated to make enough space in her life for another man. But what haunted me most wasn't the logistics of the affair. It was the emotional fallout that followed me home every night. Because while Emily slept peacefully beside me, probably dreaming of a life I wasn't part of, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling panic swell in my chest until my hands shook. Nights where I had to get out of bed and sit on the cold bathroom floor because my heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might pass out. And during the day, I kept pretending everything was normal, while she lied to my face with the kind of ease that makes you question every moment of your marriage. And I swear, the emotional contrast was enough to make me feel like I was losing my mind. That's when I found an online emotional support group for betrayed spouses, a place full of people who'd been through the same gut-wrenching storm. And for the first time, I felt understood in a way I couldn't explain to anyone in my life, because betrayal is isolating in a way heartbreak never is. It makes you feel stupid for trusting, guilty for missing the signs, angry at yourself for loving someone who would do this to you. And the group helped me anchor my thoughts, teaching me how to document everything properly, how not to confront her too early, how affairs follow predictable patterns even when the details feel unique, and their advice became a guidebook for the nightmare I was living through. Meanwhile, Emily's behavior became even more suspicious, almost like she sensed something shifting but couldn't pinpoint what, because she started asking me strange questions, like whether I trusted her, whether I thought she'd ever lie to me, and she asked them in this overly soft voice that felt rehearsed, like she was trying to gauge where my head was. And when I responded calmly, she seemed to relax back into the rhythm of her deception. But then came the night that broke through whatever thin layer of denial I had left. Emily had gone to bed early after claiming she was exhausted from yoga, and while she slept, her tablet, which she rarely used, buzzed with a notification. And normally she was meticulous about logging out of everything. But tonight, maybe because she was tired or careless or distracted, she forgot, and there it was on the screen in bright white text. Last night was amazing. Same time Thursday from Daniel. I stared at that message so long that my vision blurred, and I don't know how I kept myself from waking her up and demanding answers right then, but the voice of my support group echoed in my mind telling me, don't confront too early. Don't give them a chance to spin the narrative. Don't let them bury the truth. So I took a picture of the message with my own phone, closed the tablet, and sat in silence with the kind of heartbreak that makes your entire body feel heavy, like grief sitting in your bones. The next morning, I reached out to Claire again, and when I showed her the screenshot, she didn't even look surprised, just tired. And we decided then and there to take the next step, consulting a lawyer, because even though I wasn't ready emotionally, I needed to protect myself legally. And when I eventually sat down with the attorney, he told me something that threw me off balance. If you want to protect yourself, file first. And the logic behind it was brutal but clear. Filing first ensured I wouldn't be blindsided by whatever story Emily concocted to justify her affair. And it put me in a better legal position if things turned ugly. And the idea of divorcing her made my chest ache. But the idea of staying with her after everything I knew felt even worse. So I began preparing quietly, gathering documents, printing evidence, organizing everything in a hidden folder I kept at work where she would never find it. Meanwhile, Emily began acting almost aggressively defensive without me saying anything, and it was bizarre. She started lashing out at me for no reason, accusing me of not checking in on her emotional needs, saying I felt distant, calling me insecure when I asked simple questions like how her day went or what time her class ended, and I realized something the support group had warned me about. Cheaters often start gaslighting when they feel guilty, twisting reality to make you doubt yourself, and that's exactly what she was doing, trying to flip the narrative before the truth surfaced. She started staying out even longer, coming home with that same mixture of excuses and scripted smiles, and every time she kissed me on the cheek goodnight, I felt a mix of disgust, heartbreak, and numbness because I knew where her mouth had been the night before. Claire and I continued comparing data, cross-checking timestamps, and building an undeniable record of the entire affair until one day she told me she'd hired a private investigator. Not out of spite, but because she needed solid evidence for her own divorce case. And a part of me felt guilty letting her spend money, but she insisted it helped both of us, so I didn't argue. A week later, she messaged me at midnight, telling me she had something I needed to see, and when she sent the video, my entire body went cold. It was Emily and Daniel, hand in hand, walking into a hotel together. Not hurried or nervous, but comfortable. Like this was routine. Like this was their own twisted version of date night. And watching it felt like someone reached into my chest and crushed whatever was left of my heart. In that moment, everything sharpened. My grief, my anger, my clarity. And I knew the charade was over, because you can ignore vague suspicions, blurry photos, even screenshots if you're desperate enough. But you cannot ignore a video of your spouse walking into a hotel with another man, smiling, touching him, leaning into him like she used to lean into me. That video was the final blow, the last piece of proof I needed to confirm what my gut had been screaming for weeks. But my heart wasn't ready to accept. My marriage wasn't broken, it was gone. And all that remained now was the confrontation I couldn't avoid any longer. The moment I had to look Emily in the eyes and show her everything. Not because I wanted her excuses or apologies, but because she needed to see that I knew the truth she'd been trying so hard to bury. And I needed her to understand that the version of me who trusted her blindly no longer existed. That Friday evening felt unnaturally calm, like the air itself was holding its breath as I sat on the couch waiting for Emily to walk through our door. And for the first time in months, I wasn't anxious or confused or trying to make excuses for her behavior. I was simply done, and I could feel that quiet finality in my chest as clearly as the ticking clock on the wall. When the front door finally opened and she stepped inside, she looked exactly like someone who thought she still had control. Hair slightly messy in that effortless way she always claimed yoga made her feel, clothes a little too perfect for a workout, and that smell, that disgusting cocktail of hotel soap mixed with the faint trace of cheap cologne that didn't belong anywhere near my wife. And she didn't even bother to hide the fact that she rushed straight past me like she always did, heading for the bathroom for her immediate post-yoga shower. But this time I said her name, calmly, firmly, and she froze. I told her to sit, and something in my tone must have cut straight through her practice routine because she actually listened, her eyes darting around the room like she was scanning for the safest lie to reach for. And I didn't say a word at first. I just took my phone, opened the gallery, and held up the first photo, the one Claire sent me weeks ago that started this entire collapse. And the moment Emily's eyes landed on it, that frozen little smirk cracked across her face like she couldn't decide if denial or panic should show up first. And then she let out this pathetic little laugh, the kind people do when they're trying way too hard to pretend nothing is wrong, and she said the photo looked edited, like some random wife in another city had hired a Hollywood effects team to doctor a picture of my wife pressed up against her husband in the parking lot. And when she realized the laugh didn't land, she said it again, slower this time, like repetition would make it believable. But I didn't entertain her. I simply swiped to the next photo, then another, then the screenshots of the messages she thought she deleted forever, and finally, the short video. A shaky but clear recording of her kissing him, smiling at him, whispering something in his ear as they walked toward the elevator of the Maple Ridge Suites Hotel. And I watched the shift happen in her face. The exact moment her brain stopped scrambling for excuses and switched into pure fear, because she knew there was no talking her way out of this one. No soft lie or sweet manipulation to wrap around me anymore. She slumped forward, her hands trembling, and then the sobbing started, dramatic and loud and theatrical, tears pouring down her face like she believed they could wash away months of betrayal. And she kept saying she was confused, that she was stressed, that she was lonely, that she didn't know what she was doing, that the yoga instructor encouraged emotional openness, which was such a stupid phrase it almost made me laugh. And then she tried pivoting into a different tactic, blaming Claire, saying the poor woman must be seeking revenge, and maybe she framed her as if Claire didn't have enough on her plate dealing with her husband's betrayal. Emily grabbed my arm and said it only happened once, then immediately contradicted herself by saying she planned to end it anyway, and then threw in that I misunderstood everything. Like my eyes and Claire's photos and the timestamps and the hotel receipts were somehow all conspiring against her. And the craziest part was watching her cycle through these excuses like she had rehearsed them, as if she expected me to crumble the same way I used to whenever she guilt-tripped me during simple disagreements. But this time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't yelling. I was calm, steady, grounded, and that terrified her more than anything because she could feel it. The shift in power, the moment she realized the version of me she used to manipulate was dead, and in its place sat someone who already mourned her months ago. When she finally stopped sobbing long enough to look up at me, I reached into my drawer, pulled out the envelope I had prepared earlier that week, and placed it in front of her. And when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Divorce papers, already filed, already in motion, proof that I wasn't here to negotiate. I wasn't here for another cycle of promises and apologies and temporary change. I was here to end something she had killed long before she admitted it. She broke completely then, sliding off the couch and onto the floor like gravity suddenly doubled, begging for another chance, saying she could fix it, that she'd go to therapy, that she'd cut him off, that she'd delete everything, throw away her phone, change gyms, quit yoga entirely, anything. Everything. She said she just needed one more shot, one more chance to prove she still loved me. But I told her the truth, that I had already spent weeks grieving a marriage she set on fire without hesitation, that the man she betrayed wasn't here anymore, and the version of me that survived wasn't sticking around out of pity. When I stood up and told her I was leaving that night, she looked at me like she expected the world to stop moving, like I owed her one more conversation, one more breakdown, one more tear-filled argument, but I didn't. And instead of staying in the guest room or letting her manipulate me into sleeping under the same roof, I grabbed my bag, packed days before, and walked out, heading straight to the spare bedroom offered by a friend I made in the support group I joined after Claire reached out. A group filled with people who knew exactly what betrayal felt like, people who didn't judge, didn't sugarcoat, didn't make excuses, and staying there reminded me, for the first time in a long time, what it felt like to breathe normally. The next few weeks weren't magical or easy, but they were honest. I went to therapy regularly, hit the gym like it was a lifeline, cooked my own meals again, built routines that didn't involve waiting for Emily's mood to determine the tone of the house. And I slowly began rediscovering the version of myself I had lost, trying to fix a marriage she wasn't even committed to. And during that time, Claire finalized her own divorce, and even though we stayed in touch, it wasn't romantic or messy or dramatic. It was just two people who had walked through the same fire and came out laughing at the ashes, supporting each other without expectations. I wasn't interested in dating. Not yet, maybe not for a long time, but I was interested in living again, in feeling like a full human being instead of someone holding together a marriage with duct tape and hope. And meanwhile, Emily kept reaching out, first apologizing, then blaming herself, then blaming him, then asking for closure, then asking if we could talk, then pretending she just wanted to check in, but I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I genuinely had nothing left to give her. And because every time my phone buzzed, I realized more and more that freedom doesn't always come in the form of revenge. Sometimes it comes in moments exactly like this. Quiet mornings where I woke up with dread. Peaceful nights where I didn't wonder who she was texting. Long drives where I didn't feel like a stranger in my own life. And the more distance I put between myself and the wreckage she created, the more I understood that the marriage didn't end the night I confronted her. It ended long before that. Somewhere between the first lie she told and the last piece of trust she threw away, and all the photos did was shine a light on truth she had already written. Now, months later, when I look back at that moment, the photo that shattered the illusion, the confrontation that cracked open a truth I had been too scared to face, I don't feel heartbreak anymore. I feel clarity. I feel strength. I feel the kind of relief that comes only after surviving a storm you didn't see coming. And as I sit here telling this story, the one thing I've learned is simple. Sometimes, the thing that breaks your heart is the same thing that finally sets you free. And walking away from someone who lied, manipulated, and betrayed me wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of a future she never expected me to have. A future built on honesty, support, real people, real connections, and a version of myself I'm finally proud of becoming. The end. My wife's best friend warned me about her, and I didn't believe her until it was too late. I never thought a simple backyard summer party would be the beginning of the end of my marriage, or at least the end of the version of my life I thought was real. Because at 30 years old, living in a quiet neighborhood in Seattle with my wife, Emily, I genuinely believed I had everything figured out. A stable job in tech, a cozy 2-story home we'd renovated together, Sunday morning coffee routines, shared Spotify playlists, lazy movie nights where she'd fall asleep on my shoulder. Simple things, but they were the foundation of a life I thought was solid, unshakable, and honest. So when Emily's best friend, Ava, pulled me aside that afternoon, the smell of grilled burgers and fresh cut grass lingering in the air as friends laughed near the patio, I had no reason at all, to think she was about to plant a seed of doubt that would eventually grow into a forest fire. Yet the moment she touched my arm, her hand trembling slightly, her eyes darting toward Emily like she was afraid of being seen, something inside me tightened, and I knew whatever she was about to say wasn't something people casually drop between sips of beer and background music. And when she finally spoke, voice soft but urgent, "You need to watch her. Please, I'm telling you this because you deserve the truth." I actually froze. Not because I believed her, but because it felt so absurd, so out of place, so dramatically unlike her that my brain refused to process it. And I remember letting out a small, awkward laugh, brushing it off like it was nothing more than petty girl drama, some argument they'd had, maybe some jealousy thing I didn't want to get involved in. So I told her gently but dismissively, "Ava, come on, she's just stressed." And Ava's face hardened with this heartbreaking mixture of frustration and sadness as she whispered, "You think I'd risk everything to say this if it wasn't serious?" But before I could ask what she meant, Emily appeared behind us, smiling, radiant, holding 2 drinks, and Ava's entire expression snapped into something neutral, even cheerful. And in seconds, the conversation evaporated like it never happened at all, leaving this weird, lingering echo in my chest that I shoved down because that's what you do when your reality is comfortable. You choose denial without even realizing you're choosing it. That night, I didn't mention the conversation to Emily, partly because I didn't want to start drama, and partly because it felt like betraying her, believing even for a moment that her best friend would warn me against her. But in the days that followed, something in the air shifted. Subtle at first, like when weather changes slowly and you don't realize a storm is coming until it's already overhead. And I started noticing little things that didn't fit the version of Emily I knew. She began keeping her phone practically glued to her hand, turning it face down every time she set it on a table, adding a new passcode she didn't tell me about, even though we never had secrets like that. She started working late more often, claiming new projects, new deadlines, new clients, brushing off my questions with irritated sighs or that tight smile she used when she didn't want to talk. She became shorter with me, picking fights over nothing, like the way I folded laundry, or how I forgot to buy oat milk, or how I didn't immediately respond to one of her texts even though I was literally in a meeting. And each argument left her storming off, phone in hand, like she was desperate to be anywhere except near me. And I kept telling myself she was stressed, burnt out, overwhelmed by her workload. But underneath every rationalization was a growing unease I tried to suffocate day after day because I didn't want to believe the alternative. Didn't want to consider that Ava's warning wasn't random or petty, but something real, something dangerous. Meanwhile, Ava kept her distance from me in a way that felt deliberate, careful, like she didn't want to meddle unless I came to her. But every time we crossed paths, group dinners, weekend hangouts, birthday gatherings, I'd catch her looking at me with this quiet guilt in her eyes, like she knew a truth I wasn't ready for, like she was watching a slow-motion disaster she couldn't stop and I wouldn't see. And those looks only made the anxiety worse, because if someone is lying, you expect inconsistencies. But what terrified me most was that Emily wasn't acting inconsistent. She was acting different, like she was quietly detaching herself from me one piece at a time, emotionally withdrawing inch by inch, smile by smile, kiss by kiss. And I kept pretending I didn't notice because acknowledging it meant accepting something was breaking. But one moment stands out more than the rest. A Thursday night when she came home late again. Hair messy, makeup slightly smudged, the faint smell of cologne clinging to her sweater, a scent that wasn't mine. And when I asked how her day was, she snapped, "Why are you interrogating me?" Before locking herself in the bathroom, leaving me standing in the hallway feeling like I'd been slapped by a stranger wearing my wife's face. And that was the first night I didn't fall asleep easily. The first night my stomach churned with dread. The first night Ava's warning echoed in my head without me being able to push it away. And yet, even with all the signs, even with my intuition screaming that something was wrong, I still convinced myself I was overthinking, paranoid, making drama where there wasn't any, because it was easier to believe I was the problem than to believe my wife, the woman I trusted more than anyone, might be pulling away from me for a reason I wasn't ready to face. And by the time the tension in our house became something I could feel in my bones, vibrating under the surface of every conversation, every awkward silence, every half-hearted hug, I realized the worst part wasn't that something was wrong. It was that Emily seemed perfectly fine letting me feel it alone, walking around like the guilt didn't touch her at all, like the distance didn't bother her, like she was already halfway out the door mentally while I was still clutching onto our memories like life rafts. And even though nothing explosive had happened yet, no fight big enough to shatter us, no confession, no undeniable proof, the fear had finally rooted itself in my chest, the fear Ava tried to warn me about, the fear I was too naive, too trusting, too in love to see. And as that chapter of my life quietly closed, I couldn't shake the haunting certainty that something had already slipped beyond my control, that the foundation of our marriage had begun to crack long before I noticed, and that whatever truth Ava knew, whatever she had tried to save me from, was slowly, inevitably making its way toward me like a storm rolling in over the Seattle skyline, silent but unstoppable. I remember the exact moment everything fell apart. Not because it was dramatic or loud, but because it came quietly, almost politely, on an ordinary Tuesday morning while I was sitting at my desk, sipping lukewarm coffee and trying to ignore the heavy silence in my house that had settled like fog over the past few weeks. And when my phone buzzed, I expected it to be a work message or maybe some half-hearted text from Emily explaining she'd be late again. But instead, it was a name I hadn't seen pop up in a long while, Ava, and the preview alone knocked the air out of me. You need to see this. Now, my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and with hands that suddenly felt too heavy, I opened the message to find screenshot after screenshot after screenshot. A digital avalanche I wasn't prepared for, and each one was another blow to the version of reality I'd been clinging to. The first images were text messages, intimate exchanges between Emily and someone labeled as D. The kind of messages you don't send unless you're deeply involved. Messages about late-night hotel rooms, whispered promises, inside jokes, and phrases that made my stomach twist into knots. But it got worse, so much worse, because as I scrolled, I started seeing conversations about bank transfers, budget discussions, a plan to quietly siphon money from our joint account into a solo cushion, and the words that nearly made me drop my phone. Once I have enough saved, I'll tell him. I just need a clean exit. My wife, my best friend, my partner, the woman I trusted more than anything, was plotting her escape, while smiling at me across dinner tables and asking how my day was. And the betrayal hit so hard I felt physically nauseous. The next set of screenshots showed the man she was talking to. Dylan, a coworker from her firm, a guy I'd met once at a company event, who'd shaken my hand, smiled politely, and told me how lucky Emily was to have someone like me, and seeing his name appear again and again made rage spark under the heartbreak. But Ava wasn't done, because a moment later she sent a voice note, just 4 words, spoken with a tired, weighted sadness. Dylan has a girlfriend. I sat there stunned, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor like I was seeing someone else entirely. And when I finally managed to call Ava, my voice cracked halfway through her name, because I already knew I couldn't handle this alone. She picked up immediately, her voice soft but steady, and told me everything. How she'd suspected months ago. How Emily's excuses didn't line up. How she'd overheard a conversation between Emily and Dylan that made her stomach drop. How she'd been collecting evidence because she didn't know how to tell me until she was absolutely sure. And how she'd tried warning me. But I brushed it off because I still believed my wife couldn't possibly do something like this, and when I whispered, "Why didn't you tell me everything then?" She sounded like she was on the verge of tears as she replied, "Because I hoped I was wrong, and because I knew it would destroy you." But I was already destroyed, and as she talked, I felt something else growing beneath the grief. Clarity, cold and stark. The kind of clarity you don't ask for, but life forces on you. Then came the twist that tilted the world even further. Not only did Dylan have a girlfriend, but they'd been together for years, practically living together, and her name was Maya, and she had no idea what was going on behind her back. Ava had debated whether to contact her, but finally decided Maya deserved the truth just as much as I did. And within hours, we were all on a 3-way call. Me, Ava, and Maya, sharing pieces of our broken realities like puzzle fragments, each of us filling in gaps the others didn't know existed, and hearing Maya sob quietly on the other end, while admitting she suspected Dylan was distant lately but never imagined this made something inside me twist painfully because we were both victims of the same lie. Puppets in a show neither of us volunteered to star in. After the initial shock settled, the anger replaced the numbness, and that's when Ava said what I already knew, deep down, but couldn't bring myself to voice. We need to confront them. Together. The next hours felt surreal, like planning a sting operation instead of dealing with 2 people who were supposed to love us. Yet we gathered evidence meticulously. Bank statements showing money missing, photos of hotel reservations under fake names, but real credit cards, work emails with suspicious timestamps, and more screenshots than I ever wanted to read again. Maya sent us her own evidence, including messages from Dylan making excuses that mirrored the ones Emily fed me, and seeing the parallels made everything feel even more twisted. The four of us, me, Ava, Maya, and betrayal itself, formed an unexpected alliance, an emotional coalition forged from shock and heartbreak, and as we talked through the plan, where to confront them, how to present the evidence, how to remain calm, I found myself drawn to Ava in a way I hadn't expected, not romantically, but like she was the only stable point in a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis, because she spoke with a mix of strength and compassion that grounded me when I felt like I was unraveling. And every time my voice shook, she reminded me to breathe. Every time I doubted myself, she reassured me I wasn't crazy, and every time I apologized for dragging her into this, she said quietly, "I'm here because I should have protected you sooner." The more we planned, the more I realized Ava had become my anchor without me noticing. The person who saw my pain before even I was willing to acknowledge it. The person who refused to let me drown in it. By nightfall, the plan was in place. A confrontation at Emily's upcoming company anniversary celebration, where she and Dylan wouldn't be able to slip away or spin lies, where the truth would be loud and undeniable, where their carefully constructed world of secrets would finally collapse. And as I sat in the dim light of my living room, papers scattered around me, screenshots glowing on my phone, Ava's steady presence on call even after hours, something inside me settled, not peace, but resolve. The understanding that the man who'd walked into that backyard party weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone who finally saw the fault lines running through his marriage. Someone who wasn't going to be blindsided again. And as the night deepened and the weight of the coming days pressed on my chest, I didn't feel hope or relief, only the strange, quiet certainty that everything was about to change forever, that the confrontation we were planning would mark the end of one life and the beginning of another. And while I wasn't ready for any of it, I knew I wasn't facing it alone. Not anymore, because Ava had stepped into the fire with me, and there was no turning back. The night of the confrontation felt like stepping into a battlefield disguised as a celebration, because Emily's company anniversary event at the downtown Seattle Convention Center had all the usual glitter. Champagne glasses clinking, people dressed like they were trying to impress future promotions, soft jazz playing in the background. But beneath the polished surface, my heart hammered with a cold, controlled purpose as I walked in with Maya beside me and Ava just a few steps behind, her presence steadying me more than I wanted to admit. And as soon as I saw Emily across the room, laughing with her coworkers, completely unaware that the world she'd built on secrets was minutes away from collapsing, I felt this strange mixture of grief, anger, and exhaustion twist inside me. She looked beautiful in a way that hurt, like the version of her I'd loved for years was still there, but only on the surface. And the moment her eyes landed on me, confusion flashed across her face because she hadn't expected me to come. Not after being too tired from work all week, not after the distance she'd quietly created between us, and when I didn't smile back, her confusion deepened into unease. But before she could cross the room to ask what I was doing there, everything unfolded so fast it felt surreal. Maya stepped forward with a calmness that came from pure heartbreak, turning into determination, held up a folder, and said loudly enough for the cluster of coworkers around Dylan to hear, "Since you two love working together so much, we figured you could look at this too." And the way Dylan's face drained of color as she handed him the printed screenshots was almost cinematic, his eyes darting to Emily in panic, and suddenly the music seemed to fade, voices dimmed, and something like a hush rippled through the room as people sensed drama brewing in the air. Emily reached for the papers with a nervous laugh, probably assuming it was some petty argument or misunderstanding, but the second her eyes scanned the first page, the explicit messages, the hotel plans, the financial discussions, her hands started shaking and she whispered, What is this?" And I stepped forward calmly, taking out the neatly organized envelope I'd brought, my voice steady despite the storm inside me as I said, "Everything you've been hiding from me?" And I placed the evidence on the table next to the drink she had been holding moments earlier, watching her face transform from shock to fear to realization that she had no way out of this one. As more coworkers gathered, some pretending not to look, others shamelessly watching, Emily stumbled backward, whispering my name like she wanted to explain herself, but every lie she tried to form dissolved under the weight of the printed truth, because there was no way to spin text planning to drain our joint account, no way to explain telling Dylan she'd leave me once she had enough saved to land softly, no way to excuse giggling messages about me being too trusting to notice anything. Dylan tried to speak, some pathetic attempt to minimize everything, but Maya shut him down by tossing a stack of printed call logs onto the table and saying, "Don't even try, Dylan. I have dates, times, locations, and you weren't at late meetings either." And the room shifted from awkward curiosity to collective shock as people realized 2 long-term relationships were detonating in front of them. Emily looked around desperately, as if searching for someone to defend her, but even her closest coworkers stepped away. And when she turned to Ava, her best friend, someone she'd leaned on for years, Ava didn't move toward her. Instead, standing beside me, she said in a steady voice that cut deeper than anything I could have said, "I warned you, this would destroy everything." And Emily's face crumpled because that was when she finally understood. She hadn't just lost her marriage or her reputation. She had lost the only friend who had ever genuinely cared about her. The chaos in the room swelled when Dylan's supervisor, having overheard enough, stepped forward and asked him to step aside for a conversation. And that's when panic fully set in for both of them. Because they hadn't just been cheating, they'd been doing it on company time, in company spaces during work hours, using company devices, and everyone knew how brutal corporate HR could be about misconduct. Emily reached for me then, eyes glossy, voice cracking, saying, "Please, babe, can we talk privately?" But everything inside me had gone quiet, not numb, but resolute. And I answered softly, "The time for privacy was when you chose honesty." And watching her flinch at that, watching her realize there was no saving this, was the moment the last piece of denial inside me finally died. She tried reaching for Ava next, whispering, "Please, you know me, you know I wouldn't." But Ava stepped back, her voice breaking as she said, "I knew who you used to be. I don't know who you are now." And that was the end of their friendship. Right there in the middle of the event hall, surrounded by people who suddenly looked at Emily not with admiration, but disappointment, judgment, even pity. After security gently guided Dylan away for the HR meeting he clearly wasn't prepared for, Emily tried to follow me outside, crying, begging for a chance to explain, but Ava stepped between us protectively. Not to pick a fight, but to shield me from the emotional manipulation she knew was coming. And as Emily's sobs echoed down the hallway, I felt something heavy lift off my chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, but clarity. The calm that comes when the truth finally stops hiding. That night, when I got home, I froze our joint accounts, changed passwords, filed the initial paperwork to separate finances, and told Emily, through a short, controlled message, to collect her things the next day while I wasn't home. She moved out within 48 hours, leaving behind a house that suddenly felt too large, too quiet, too hollow, like someone had carved out all the warmth and left the structure standing. And the first night alone was brutal. Not because I missed her, but because I was grieving the version of life I thought I had, the version that never truly existed. And in that loneliness, Ava became my lifeline without ever forcing herself into that role. She checked in on me, brought food when she knew I wasn't eating right, sat with me in silence when talking felt overwhelming, and little by little, those shared moments turned into long conversations, late night walks, honest vulnerability where we talked about everything we lost, everything we feared, everything we hoped could eventually heal. I never expected recovery to feel like sitting beside someone who understood the exact kind of pain I had. But Ava made it feel safe to breathe again, and over the following weeks, our connection deepened. Not in a rushed, rebound way, but in small, sincere ways. The way she listened without trying to fix me. The way she laughed again only after making sure I was okay laughing too. The way she told me she wasn't going anywhere, that she wasn't afraid of the broken pieces as long as I wasn't afraid to let them fall. And I realized somewhere during those quiet evenings, sharing tea on my porch, talking about life beyond betrayal, that Ava wasn't just my support through the storm, she was the calm after it. Not a replacement for what I lost, but a new beginning I never expected. We didn't jump into romance, didn't force anything to happen, didn't label whatever was growing between us. It just happened naturally, gently, like two people who had walked through hell and survived long enough to see the horizon again. And as the weeks turned into months and the pain started fading into something manageable, I finally understood that this whole nightmare had broken my world apart, only to show me which pieces were worth keeping. And standing on the other side of the wreckage with Ava beside me, not as Emily's best friend anymore, but as someone who chose me through every step of recovery, I felt a quiet, honest hope for the first time in a long time. Not the hope of forcing a broken marriage back together, but the hope of rebuilding something new, something real, something honest, with someone who had proven through every action that she would never let me face another storm alone. The end. My wife was planning a girls' trip, but her airline ticket showed only one man's name next to hers. I always thought the quiet little life Lena and I built in suburban Colorado was the kind people wished for when they said they just wanted something peaceful, something steady, something that didn't make their heart pound in fear every time their phone buzzed. And for the longest time, that's exactly what I believed we had. Morning coffee on our small deck overlooking the cul-de-sac, her hair always tied up in a messy bun as she checked her work emails, and I joked that she was married to her job more than me. Evening walks with our dog Milo through the park behind our house where Lena would vent about deadlines and office politics and clients who didn't know what they wanted until the last second, and me listening, nodding, squeezing her hand, thinking that was what a husband was supposed to do. And honestly, I didn't mind it because I loved her, or at least I loved who I thought she was. And I loved the simplicity of being needed. Lena had always been ambitious, sharp, the kind of woman who walked into a room like she already owned it. And being married to someone like that felt like being tethered to a lightning bolt. You knew it was powerful, but you assumed it was also yours. Lately, though, She'd been stressed, more than usual, complaining about her workload, her boss, the toxic cycle of meetings, and when she told me she needed a break, a simple getaway with her college girlfriends, a girls' trip to Miami for sun, drinks, and spa days, I didn't question it for a second because it made sense, because she'd done similar things before, and because when someone you trust looks you in the eyes and tells you they need space to breathe, you give it to them, even if your chest tightens at the idea of sleeping alone for a few nights. She made the announcement on a Wednesday evening while chopping vegetables for dinner, casual and excited, telling me how her friends desperately needed this trip too, how they all wanted to unwind and feel 20 again. And I laughed and teased, just don't do anything I wouldn't do. And she laughed back, too quickly, too high-pitched, and I didn't think much of it at the time. But later I'd replay that exact moment in my mind like a scene in a movie where the audience already knows a twist, but the protagonist is still blissfully ignorant. The day before her flight, I offered to help her pack because that's just who I am. I like doing small things for the people I care about, and Lena had always been messy with packing, stuffing clothes into her suitcase until it looked like she was smuggling pillows. So I sat on the floor while she laid everything out on the bed in her usual chaotic way. Bikinis mixed with chargers, sunglasses tangled in socks, and she kept pacing back and forth, mumbling about forgetting something, and I remember thinking she seemed nervous, but chalked it up to travel jitters. I picked up her little travel pouch, the one she uses for documents and toiletries, and when I unzipped it to put in a miniature toothpaste, a paper slipped out like it was trying to escape, fluttering onto the carpet face up. And at first my brain didn't process what I was seeing because it didn't make sense in the context of my reality. But the bold, black letters were undeniable. Flight confirmation, passenger 1. Lena Carter, passenger 2, Daniel Rhodes. My heartbeat went from calm to catastrophic in a split second, a loud, pulsing thud in my ears that drowned out Milo's paws tapping around the hallway, and all I could do was stare at those two names, those two seats side by side on a flight that was supposed to be full of laughter and estrogen and cocktail selfies. I felt my stomach sink so violently it was like gravity itself doubled in strength under my skin, and I must have read the name Daniel Rhodes 10 times, like maybe the letters would rearrange themselves into something innocent, something that didn't immediately scream infidelity. Lena froze when she saw me holding the paper. Her face went from surprise to pale to something almost blank, like she was scrambling to pick a mask to put on, and she rushed toward me, snatching the confirmation so fast she nearly ripped it, saying, "Oh, no, that's just a mistake, Ethan, I swear." And her voice was shaking in a way I had never heard before, not even during fights or stressful work weeks, and the anxiety behind her eyes wasn't fear of misunderstanding, it was fear of being caught. I didn't sleep the night after discovering the truth about Lena's so-called girls' trip. Not because I was crying or throwing things or spiraling into some dramatic meltdown, but because my mind felt like a machine that had been switched into an unfamiliar gear, grinding and sparking and processing everything in cold, mechanical detail. And when the sun finally rose over our street in Denver, spilling soft orange light onto the bedroom floor where Lena had slept soundly beside me as if she weren't about to sneak off to Miami with another man, something inside me clicked into place. Not rage, not sorrow, but strategy. A quiet, razor-sharp clarity that came from realizing I wasn't powerless, that I didn't need to scream or break down to reclaim control. After Lena left for work that morning, still trying to act normal, giving me a kiss on the cheek that felt more like a goodbye than anything loving, I sat at my desk with my laptop and typed the name I had memorized from the flight confirmation. Daniel Rhodes. I expected him to be some faceless corporate guy or gym trainer or one of those entrepreneurial Instagram dude types, but what popped up on the screen stopped me cold. A picture of him in front of a vineyard, smiling with a woman in a white dress holding a bouquet, and the caption beneath it, engagement photos, Daniel Madison, countdown to forever. I clicked on the profile, scrolling through posts showing their engagement dinner, the bridal parties, their wedding hashtag, and a pinned announcement at the top. 6 weeks until we say I do. My breath caught because it didn't just confirm Lena was cheating. It confirmed she was cheating with someone who had a fiancé, someone preparing for a wedding, someone who was lying to a woman who clearly adored him. I didn't know Madison Hale, but I suddenly felt connected to her, like we were two separate trains headed toward the same crash site without ever realizing it. For a moment, anger tried to rise in me, tried to claw its way up my throat, but the clarity was stronger. I started gathering everything, every shred of evidence Lena and Daniel thought they had hidden, starting with screenshots of the flight confirmation, then the hotel booking details I found by guessing Daniel's email password, because apparently the man getting married in 6 weeks couldn't think of anything better than using his dog's name, followed by 123. And then I dialed the airline pretending to be Daniel, using the confirmation code to request an email copy of the travel itinerary. They sent it immediately, not just the itinerary, the receipt. A honeymoon suite at the Miami Ocean Pro Resort, candlelight dinner package, couple spa reservation, and a champagne welcome service. My hands didn't shake, my breathing didn't break, I felt calm. Dead calm. The kind of calm you only feel right before pulling the trigger on a decision that changes everything. I compiled the screenshots into a folder, titled it For Madison, and drafted a message that was short, blunt, and as gentle as I could make something this brutal. Hi Madison, my name is Ethan Carter. I believe your fiance Daniel is cheating on you with my wife. I'm attaching proof. Please reach out when you can. I hit send. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't need to guess who it was. The tremble in the voice on the other end said everything before she even formed her first full sentence. Is this Ethan? She managed, and I said yes, and then she exhaled a shaky breath that cracked halfway through like she was holding back both a sob and a scream. She asked if the screenshots were real. I told her yes. She asked how long it had been going on. I told her I only knew what I found. She asked if she could meet me. I told her I'd be at a cafe in downtown Denver in an hour. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately from her engagement photos. Long brown hair, soft features, the kind of smile that looked naturally hopeful. The kind that didn't belong in a world where people lied like this. But she wasn't smiling now. Her eyes were swollen, mascara smudged, her jaw tight, her hand gripping her phone like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She sat across from me and whispered, "Please tell me everything." And so we did what two strangers who shared the same wound do. We compared timelines, stories, excuses, all the little lies that suddenly made sense once put together like puzzle pieces from the same box. That's when we both realized the truth. Lena and Daniel had been seeing each other for at least 4 months. 4 months of sneaking, planning, lying, and laughing behind our backs. Madison covered her face with her hands and cried quietly, and I didn't touch her or try to comfort her because I knew this wasn't pain you soothed. It was pain you let burn until it becomes fuel. When she finally looked up, there was something new in her expression, not just heartbreak, but determination. "We're going to end this," she said, her voice steadier now. "Not illegally, not violently, but they're not walking away from this clean." And that's where the plan began. Small at first, then sharper, clearer, more devastating with each detail. The wedding venue, she canceled it. The florist, canceled. Caterer, gone. Dress fitting, postponed indefinitely. She called her parents, his parents, her bridesmaids. Everyone knew by noon that the wedding was off because Daniel was cheating. Meanwhile, I quietly moved the money from my joint account with Lena into a private one, recorded every call, saved every screenshot, and prepared myself for a truth bomb so big it would detonate their entire fantasy. When Lena finally came home after the complete nuclear meltdown at the Denver airport, the screaming, the crowd staring, the phones recording, the moment Madison and I dropped everything we'd been holding inside right in front of her, it was nearly midnight and the sound of her key fumbling uselessly in the lock was almost pathetic. A thin metallic scrape that told me she still didn't understand the depth of what she'd done, because she honestly thought she could walk back through that front door like the same wife who'd kissed me goodbye that morning. But the lock didn't turn, because I'd changed it. And when I opened the door and stood there, just long enough for her to see the exhaustion carved into my face, she looked completely wrecked. Mascara smeared, hair messy, eyes red and swollen from crying, the same outfit she'd worn to the airport, now wrinkled and damp from what I assumed was a combination of sweat and panic. Her suitcase sitting beside her like a dead weight she no longer had the strength to pick up, and she whispered my name like she expected me to take her in my arms and fix everything, the way I used to whenever she had a rough day at work. But all I said was, "You can come inside, Alina," and I stepped aside. Not out of love or pity, but because I needed her to walk into the consequences of her own choices, rather than locking herself out and turning this into a dramatic scene for the neighbors. She walked in slowly, almost cautiously, like she expected the house to explode, looking around as if everything looked different now. Which, in a way, it did. Because once trust dies, a home becomes a reconstruction site, not a sanctuary. And she immediately launched into a spiral of apologies, excuses, half-breath sobs, saying it wasn't what it looked like, saying she felt pressured, saying she didn't know how she let it get this far, saying she didn't mean to hurt me, saying it meant nothing, saying that she'd been stressed, lost, confused, emotionally vulnerable, every cliche in the cheater's dictionary spilling out of her mouth while she clutched her own arms as if trying to physically hold herself together. But I didn't yell, didn't slam anything, didn't cuss, didn't even raise my voice. I just listened in this eerie, detached calm because I had already spent the past 48 hours doing everything that actually mattered. Moving money into private accounts she couldn't touch, freezing our joint card, speaking to a lawyer, changing the locks, documenting everything, pulling the entire emotional power out of her hands before she ever even realized she was losing it. When I didn't respond to her frantic rambling, she fell apart even faster, realizing I was not reacting in the way she expected. The screaming match, the begging, the mutual emotional explosion she thought she could manipulate to get control back, and the moment she recognized that the version of me she relied on to soften her mistakes was gone, something inside her cracked. She dropped to her knees right next to the kitchen island and sobbed like a child who lost her way in a crowded store, reaching for my hand, but I kept it by my side because something inside me had shifted permanently. A quiet, irreversible severing. "Ethan, please, please, please. I made a mistake. I was stupid. I was lonely. Please don't give up on us, she cried, pressing her forehead against my knee. And that's when the strangest thing happened. I didn't feel disgust, didn't feel love, didn't feel hate. I felt nothing for her. Nothing. She kept repeating, it meant nothing. Over and over, like if she said it enough times, it would magically erase the flight confirmation, the honeymoon suite, the months of lying, the way she looked at Daniel at the airport when she still thought she'd get away with it. And I gently stepped back, letting her cling to air instead of me, because I realized the worst punishment she could receive wasn't rage. It was indifference, the quiet acknowledgement that she no longer had any place in the emotional space she once controlled so easily. While she cried, my phone buzzed with a message from Madison. He tried begging me back. I told him I already exposed him to everyone. His parents aren't even speaking to him. I typed back a simple, good, because there wasn't anything else to say. What Daniel faced now was his own doing, and while I didn't celebrate his pain, I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for him either. He was a grown man who chose to betray two people planning futures with him. In those following days, Madison and I talked often, not in any romantic way, not even in a flirty or emotionally charged way, but in the way two people who've survived the same wreckage cling to the only person who really understands the extent of the damage. She became someone who could finish my sentences about betrayal before I even said them. Someone who knew how strange it felt to suddenly have silence where trust used to live. Someone who knew the exact kind of pain that sits in your gut like a stone you can't digest. Meanwhile, Lena's life began unraveling in slow, painful layers. Her friends distanced themselves because no one wants to be associated with a scandal, especially one that went semi-viral after several passengers posted about the airport drama. Her job grew tense because Daniel worked in the same corporate circle, and rumors spread faster than truth. And suddenly, everyone who used to admire her now whispered behind her back. Her family didn't defend her either, calling me privately to apologize, saying she had been reckless, selfish, and they couldn't believe she'd thrown away something stable. None of that was my concern anymore. My concern became myself. Healing, therapy, the gym I hadn't stepped into in almost a year, the guitar I hadn't played since college, the hikes I always put off because Lena hated the dirt and the bugs, the quiet mornings where I made coffee and actually tasted it instead of rushing to get ready for work. I didn't recognize the man in the mirror at first, not because I looked broken, but because I looked lighter, like someone who had been carrying a boulder for so long he forgot the weight wasn't supposed to be there. And while Lena kept trying, texts, calls, long letters slipped under the door, promises to change, to become better, to do therapy, to cut off Daniel completely, to rebuild everything piece by piece. I remained steady, quiet, unmoving, because forgiveness might heal some wounds, but it can't resurrect a dead marriage, and loving her again felt as impossible as loving a lie. In therapy, I said something that surprised even me. I'm not grieving her, I'm grieving the version of myself who trusted her. And the therapist nodded like that was the moment I finally understood myself. Like that sentence was the start of my rise from a place I didn't even know I had fallen into. Lena eventually stopped trying, not because she accepted it, but because she realized that the thing she destroyed wasn't just our relationship. She destroyed the version of me who used to bend for her, and in doing so, she had lost access to the husband she assumed she'd always have. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Not happy yet, not fully healed, but free. And sometimes, freedom is the first quiet step toward becoming someone stronger than the person you used to be. I never thought I'd be the type of guy to book a solo trip, especially not to Miami, the same damn place where Lena tried to cheat on me. But something inside me snapped after the separation papers were signed, and the walls of our old apartment started feeling like they carried her voice more than mine. Like every corner of that place whispered reminders of everything she destroyed. So one random Tuesday morning, I opened my laptop, stared at the blinking cursor on the destination bar, and typed MIAMI. Not to chase the memories, but to reclaim them. To take back the city she tried to poison. And honestly, stepping out of the airport into that warm, salty breeze felt like walking into a version of my life I hadn't met yet. One where I wasn't the guy who got betrayed, but the guy who finally chose himself. So I dropped my bags at a small oceanfront Airbnb, kicked off my shoes, and walked straight to the shore where the waves rolled in with the kind of quiet confidence I hadn't felt in months. And I just stood there, letting the water hit my ankles while the sun melted into the horizon, realizing that healing doesn't always come with dramatic moments. Sometimes it's just standing alone on a beach and breathing for the first time in a long time. The next morning, I woke up early, not because of stress or nightmares this time, but because my body was actually rested. Like my brain finally shut off the alarm it had been ringing for months. So I grabbed a notebook from my bag and sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee that tasted way stronger than anything Lena ever made. And I started journaling. Not those cheesy affirmations or Dear Diary things, but raw stuff. Brutally honest lines about how I lost myself in the marriage, how I kept shrinking to make space for her, how I convinced myself that loving someone meant tolerating pain. And as the words spilled out, I realized I wasn't writing about heartbreak anymore. I was writing about freedom. Over the next few days, Miami became my rehab in ways I didn't expect. I spent mornings on the beach watching runners and surfers, afternoons wandering through art districts and little cafes, evenings listening to music at open-air bars where nobody knew my story and nobody needed to. And somewhere between the laughter of strangers and the glow of neon lights reflecting off wet pavement, I felt something shift inside me. Confidence returning, not loudly, but quietly, like a seed sprouting after a long winter. I even met people, not romantically, just friendly travelers. A retired couple from Colorado who told me life was too short to cling to people who drain you. A bartender who taught me how to make a perfect mojito and said, pain is temporary, but peace is earned. A college kid sketching strangers on the sidewalk who drew me without asking and said I looked like a man figuring himself out. I kept that sketch folded in my journal. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what Lena did, or who she texted, or why she betrayed me. I was thinking about myself, my future, my choices, and on the last morning in Miami, I stood on the shoreline with the waves brushing my feet and finally understood something important. Losing someone who lied to you isn't a loss. It's a damn upgrade, a release, a doorway back to the version of yourself you abandoned trying to keep them happy. When I flew back home, I didn't feel dread or sadness. I felt ready. The divorce finalized fast, clean, quiet, emotionless, and I didn't even flinch when I signed the last page. Instead of going back to the apartment full of memories, I drove straight to a small cabin I'd put a down payment on near the mountains, tucked between tall pines and a river that hummed through the night. And the moment I stepped inside, breathing in the scent of wood and cold air, I knew I'd made the right choice. This was mine, untouched, untainted, a place where healing didn't feel forced but natural. I spent my days hiking, cooking real meals, journaling by the fireplace, learning to enjoy silence, not the heavy silence of a broken marriage, but the peaceful kind that feels like a protective blanket around your soul. And life slowly, quietly rebuilt itself. Then one evening, just when the sun was dripping gold over the treetops and I was settling into my new routine, I found an envelope slipped under my door with Lena's handwriting on it. A long emotional letter filled with apologies, memories, promises, lines about missing what we had and wanting one more chance. And for a moment, I just held it, feeling absolutely nothing, no anger, no sadness, no longing, just clarity. I sat in front of the fireplace, opened the letter, read every word calmly like it was written about strangers, not us. And when I finished, I folded it once, placed it gently into the fire, and watched the flames curl around the paper until her words crumbled into ash, disappearing just like her hold on me. That night, I stepped onto the porch with a mug of hot coffee, the sky turning soft shades of pink and orange as the sun rose over the mountains, the air crisp against my skin, and something inside me settled in a way it never had before. I finally understood the truth I had run from for months. I didn't lose a wife, I lost a liar. And standing there, watching the world wake up in front of my new home, feeling more like myself than I had in years, I realized I gained something far more important. I gained me. The end.